Last week, Ubisoft dropped a trailer for the upcoming compilation Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered. Both longtime and new fans of the series alike will get to experience what it was like to play the third Assassin's Creed game, including all its DLC and the companion title Liberation. The remaster, based on this limited look, has received nothing but positive reception, with praise being directed to the new lighting overlay, as well as the general bump in texture quality. However, 2012 wasn't that long ago, and we at the Flickering Myth game team recall there being plenty of flaws with Assassin's Creed 3, problems that will not be resolved outside of a full-fledged remake. As such, here are 7 reasons we believe prospective buyers should temper their excitement for this game. Be warned that spoilers for both AC3 and Liberation will be discussed. AC3's main character, Raduna Gaydon or Connor, admittedly had a lot going against him. We had just spent multiple games investing in past series protagonists Altair and Ezio, and so any new assassin was going to be revealed on the curve. That being said, Connor's potential as a character was truly wasted. A half-native, half-British person dealing with the atrocities committed against his people had a lot of power behind it, but Connor's character arc has turned from one of justice to one of boneheaded stupidity. Most of his actions constantly violate the Creed's tenet of never revealing yourself, creating an arc that ends up being a poor retread of Assassin's Creed 1's Altair. Connor is hot-headed, constantly ignores orders, and never learns from his mistakes, instead consistently acting naive and displaying a black and white view of the world. All things considered though, he is the lowest issue on this list for a couple of reasons, those being the Homestead missions and the Tyranny of King Washington DLC. Both do a solid job of expanding upon his personality and making him a full-fledged three-dimensional character. We just wish the same effort had been applied to the story. Speaking of, Connor's poor characterization would have been bearable had the writers at least crafted a historical narrative worth diving into, but it sadly wasn't the case either. History has always been Ubisoft's playing ground, going back to the Prince of Persia Sands of Time, but it's been wisely used as a backdrop to the fictional story they've wanted to tell. Yes, Altair and Ezio both encountered their fair share of archival figures, but their stories didn't become about the Crusades or the Renaissance until the final stretch. AC3 from the get-go is about the American Revolution, from its beginnings in the French and Indian War to its ultimate culmination at Yorktown. The problem with this is the developers seemed more interested in reiterating this section of American history than telling another chapter of the Assassin-Templar conflict that happened to coincide with the war. Connor is conveniently at every major event of the Revolution, and the insistence by the writers to put him at these events creates a narrative that can get outright ridiculous at times, which is saying something considering this is the same series that had you fistfight with the Pope. Want to know how Paul Revere felt during his midnight ride? Don't worry, he gets a piggyback with you to ride to Lexington. Ever want to know what it was like to command colonial troops? Don't worry, you get to do it at the battles of Concord and Monmouth. Assassins were meant to be operating behind the scenes, only taking public action in a few key instances, like the confrontation with Robert DeSable in AC1. These storytelling changes in AC3 aren't even for the better. Playing horsey with Paul Revere and operating artillery just isn't fun compared to conventional stealth and action missions that use history as a secondary storytelling device. Every AC game but 3 somehow understood this, and it's something to consider when looking to buy AC3 Remastered. Keep in mind, however, that even a proficiency in American history won't quite help you understand AC3's campaign. There is more to be purchased than what the remaster provides. Comic book fans are well aware of the concept of tie-ins. This idea that, yeah, you can purchase the main issues of an event, but if you want the full story, you have to buy every single spin-off and supplement. Video games are no strangers to that monetary tactic as well, and neither is Assassin's Creed for that matter. But AC3 is the only time we can think of when it actively impacted our enjoyment of the story. There are a lot of time skips employed in the narrative that, as a result, leave wide plot holes that the game never bothers to fill in. Questions like why the American Brotherhood is in such disarray, or why Haytham wasn't there for Connor's upbringing, are never explained in the main game, and it makes for a frustrating story because they're not just small pieces of trivia, they're integral storytelling blocks. No, for those interested in buying Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered, keep in mind that you won't have a full grasp of this story unless you get the novel Assassin's Creed Forsaken and the prequel-sequel Assassin's Creed Rogue, a much bigger investment in a single purchase. Even with these caveats, the past at least ended somewhat respectfully. We cannot say the same for the next entry. The modern-day story was always a polarizing feature of the first 5 AC games. There were people who liked it, feeling it contributed to the lore, and people who hated it, feeling it took away from the more interesting historical narratives. Regardless of these differences, there are 2 things both sides can universally agree on. 1, this modern-day story was better than the first-person sections that dominated Black Flag through Syndicate, and 2, the ending to the Desmond saga was outright terrible. Desmond was a character who had been built up from the first AC. He was a working-class guy who was forced into the Assassin-Templar conflict after Abstergo kidnapped him. Over the course of the Ezio trilogy, players got to see all the sides of Desmond, from the revelation of his assassin lineage through his suffering from the bleeding effect. This proved useful in AC3 as we were finally given missions where we got to play as Desmond in the modern day setting. They were fun enough and gave us a hopeful look at what future sections set in the present would look like. Or so we thought. Fans of the series know by now what transpired, but to quickly recap, Desmond was unceremoniously killed off in the span of a couple of seconds, the other characters running away while Juno was released into the world. For a character we had invested a lot of time into, it was an incredibly disappointing ending that someone made Quantum Leap's finale look Shakespearean. Remaster or not, who honestly wants to re-experience that? It's no secret that AC3 was released with a bunch of game-breaking bugs. While not as bad as Unity, it was a case of the developers having to create a day one patch, which is never a good sign. Now, we don't expect to find any technical issues with the remaster, however there are some inherent game design flaws that we feel will hamper your enjoyment. First and foremost is the weapon selection system. It's painful. You literally have to go to an entirely different loading screen every time you want to change weapons or items. Next is the broken stealth system, wherein enemies are able to see through walls and even pass stealth mechanics like their Brotherhood impersonation, which were, made with the sole purpose of hiding you. Lastly, there is the simple fact that combat is way too easy. Outside of mandatory missions, stealth is outright discouraged because Connor is a one-man killing machine, equipped with an assortment of weapons that enable him to easily mow down enemies, from the tomahawk to the dual pistols to the rope dart. Ubisoft may have removed instant medicine, but it did not stop the game from being an outright cakewalk. One of the problems with bringing back an older game without overhauling it is, you leave in systems that may have been revolutionary for the time, but just don't work in the contemporary gaming sphere. Now, admittedly all the pre-Black Flag games bear these marks, but that doesn't help AC3's case. To start with, you have the notoriety meter, where doing any wrong action results in an increasing number of guards being made aware of your presence. While theoretically fine, it actually hinders the fun factor of the game by preventing you from traversing through the cityscape, instead having to waste time ripping off posters and bribing newspaper vendors. The menus are also a hassle to get through. We previously mentioned the weapon selection tab, but that honestly looks like a checkerboard compared to the other ones in the game, particularly the crafting menu, which overcomplicated the simple format from Revelations. Finally, the tutorial aspect is just too dang long. Not only do you have to spend 3 sequences playing as Hatham, but you don't even get to play as an adult Connor until the end of the 4th sequence, and then you don't get access to your assassin gear until the 6th sequence. It's a case of Ubisoft taking too long to open up their world, an issue we believe fans used to Origins and Odyssey will have. It's very important that gamers and consumers realize that there is a reason why Assassin's Creed Liberation didn't get the attention it deserved. It just wasn't programmed well. It was originally a handheld title that was later ported to consoles, and that transition doesn't quite hide the issues. The animations are very stilted, which is saying something since most of them are just lifted from Connor. Parkouring isn't as fun, the story is too jumpy, and there's a flawed attire mechanic wherein the main protagonist Aveline is able to switch to different costumes with different functionalities, albeit all with their own handicap. While it is nice to see Ubisoft give the game more love, there's no guarantee that they have fixed these problems. So yeah, that's our take on Assassin's Creed 3. It's a beautiful game with a lot of great aspects, but also a lot of problems. If you're thinking about purchasing the remaster, take all of this into consideration. What do you think of AC3? Do you agree or disagree with anything we said? If you liked this video, please consider hitting the subscribe button and leave your thoughts below. Regardless, we hope you all have a great day. Take care, everyone.